After being reincarnated with my beloved wife, we both found ourselves back in the year we first entered university. However, instead of staying close to me, she turned around and went after her childhood crush. She even went as far as to say that I ruined her happiness in the previous life and mocked my incompetence. This time, I was fully awake. I no longer sacrificed the chance to inherit my family's fortune or the opportunity to pursue a top-tier major for her. I was living the life that was meant for me. What I didn't expect, though, was that my wife's crush turned out to be a psychopath who wanted her to take the fall for his crimes. In the end, it was my wife, bruised and battered, who used every trick in the book to beg for my forgiveness. But I never looked back at her again. Chapter 1. When I entered the twilight years of my life, I wrote my wish for the next life with my beloved wife, Evelyn, under the wish wall in the park. In the next life, I still want to be with Evelyn, forever. She was my one true love in this life, but I still hoped for another chance in the next. The next day, when I opened my eyes, I was astonished to find that I had returned to the year I first entered university. Welcome, new students. The banner hung conspicuously at the school gate, immediately bringing back memories of that time. Back then, I had resolutely given up the chance to attend a prestigious university just to study at the same one as Evelyn. After all the years of effort and pursuit, she was finally moved and accepted my confession. Thinking of this, I couldn't wait to put down my luggage and rush to her dormitory to meet her. I wonder if she has also reincarnated. On the way to see her, I couldn't stop thinking about the reunion with Evelyn. I ran frantically, but suddenly, a familiar voice came from beside me. Senior Marco, I have so much luggage. I'm so tired. Can you help me? I turned around quickly and saw Evelyn holding a suitcase, her face slightly flushed, playfully chiding the men beside her. She was still as beautiful as ever, with skin as fair as snow and long hair cascading like a waterfall. The man beside her was someone I knew all too well. He was Evelyn's crush, Marco. It was well known that Evelyn had once liked Marco. He was the first love of many girls, and countless others had pursued him. Evelyn had been one of the top contenders. Marco took the suitcase from her and smiled at her. I could see her ears turning redder. The two of them walked away, chatting and laughing. I started to feel something was off. In my previous life, at this time, I was the one who had helped Evelyn with her luggage. Yet this time, I arrived even earlier, and she had chosen to find Marco instead. It was clear that Evelyn had also reincarnated. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Evelyn had reincarnated. So why hadn't she come to me first? Why did she choose Marco? In the end, I couldn't sit still anymore and called her to get to the bottom of it. Evelyn, you've reincarnated too, haven't you? There was a long silence on the other end of the line before she answered with a single word. Yes. I was so overwhelmed with excitement at the thought of both of us being reincarnated that I completely forgot about her and Marco. That's great, Evelyn. Our wish has come true. We'll be together in this life too. I was overjoyed, but I didn't notice that her voice sounded far less enthusiastic. When Evelyn was preparing for her major transfer exams, I reminded her repeatedly, you must study hard and get into my medical program. We've made a promise that this life will be more successful than the last. She agreed without hesitation and spent hours every day in the library, studying for 7 or 8 hours at a time. I was deeply gratified. It seemed that in her previous life, she had felt guilty for not passing the medical exams. This time, she was determined to study hard for the both of us. I was the only person in Evelyn's heart. That day, she must have just run into Marco by chance. I dreamed every day of us having a wonderful university life in the same major. I even fantasized about the future, where we would continue to study medicine and become a remarkable couple in the field. But one day, I accidentally saw Evelyn's choice of major transfer. Her intended new major wasn't medicine at all. It was psychology, the field that Marco was in. In an instant, my confusion felt like a tangled mess. I angrily confronted Evelyn. Didn't we agree that you would transfer to the medical program so we could work hard together? Why did you secretly change it to psychology? Her eyes were filled with tears, seemingly startled by my tone, and she looked at me with an expression of grievance. I'm sorry, the medical program is just too hard to get into, and I've realized that I'm more interested in psychology. Since I get a second chance at life, I want to study something I truly love. I didn't mean to hide it from you. Please don't be angry. She took my hand, gently swaying her fingers in mine. My gaze locked onto her face, trying to understand her inner feelings through her eyes. But as I looked at her smile, her brows, even her gently trembling eyelashes, I felt an overwhelming attraction. She kept whispering sweet words in my ear, trying to win my forgiveness. My heart wavered. If you really like psychology, then I support you. Chapter 2. To help Evelyn prepare for her exams, I ran around trying to gather information for her, but on my way, I suddenly got into a car accident. When I opened my eyes, I found myself lying in a hospital bed. Fortunately, the accident wasn't serious, just some superficial injuries. My roommates were sitting beside me. I quickly got up, scanning the room, hoping to catch a glimpse of the familiar figure I had been waiting for. Stop looking. Evelyn hasn't come at all. One of my roommates, Luis, Spoke up. How could you not have told her? With such a big thing like me being in a car accident, there's no way she wouldn't come. I was starting to get anxious. They exchanged glances and hesitated for a moment before responding. We told her everything. Even exaggerated that you were almost dead from the accident. But she said she had something urgent and didn't have time to visit you. Just now. A classmate even told me she's currently at an art exhibition with Marco. Holding hands. See, there's a photo. Luis handed me his phone. The shock was like a lightning bolt to my chest. In my previous life, Evelyn and I had been so close, so loving. How could she betray me like this? Ignoring my roommate's objections and the pain from my injuries, I rushed out of the hospital, determined to find Evelyn. This time, I had to get to the bottom of it. Meeting you was such a blessing. Actually, this song is dedicated to someone special. I've liked him for a long time, but today, I don't want to keep this inside anymore. I want to express my feelings right here. Evelyn stood in the middle of the playground, nervously fiddling with the hem of her clothes, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. I had rushed back to campus, only to stumble upon this scene. My steps froze. I held my breath, praying that Evelyn wouldn't say those words. Marco, I've liked you for a long time. Will you be with me? She shouted into the microphone, her confession echoing across the entire playground. In an instant, everyone's gaze shifted toward Marco, and the crowd began to cheer. Say yes, say yes, say yes. My heart skipped a beat. My suspicions were true. Luis and the others hadn't lied to me. Marco was pushed toward Evelyn by the crowd. The two of them stood together. A perfect match. Evelyn, I like you too. Marco gently cupped her face, gazing into her eyes with affection. Evelyn smiled, and I had never seen her smile so brightly. Oh, they're together. They embraced on stage as the crowd's cheers grew louder and louder. The shrill cries pierced my ears. No one noticed me standing in the corner, my heart breaking with each passing second. Chapter 3. Why? I stared at the familiar yet unfamiliar figure in front of me, my voice trembling. Upon seeing me, Evelyn looked shocked. Luis said you were almost dead after being hit by a car. How come you're still standing here in one piece? Her words were like a cold slap to my face. So she really wanted me to die, just so she could be with Marco in this life. Evelyn stopped pretending and bluntly laid everything out. Gabriel, do you know why I was reincarnated to this day? Because the wish I wrote on the wish wall was that if I could go back, I would definitely be with Marco. There wasn't a trace of guilt in her eyes. She spoke as if everything was perfectly natural. Evelyn, I was reincarnated for you. You're the only person left in this world for me, and you promised me. How could you just abandon me? I felt an overwhelming sense of despair. She let out a cold laugh. I was never happy with you. It was you who ruined my beautiful life in the last life. My life has been given a second chance, and I'm begging you, stop preventing me from having a better life. Being with you is painful enough. You have no money, no ability to give me a good life. Ask yourself, do you really deserve me? She spoke through her tears, as though I was the one who had betrayed her. In the previous life, I had sacrificed everything for her. I gave up the chance to attend a prestigious school and inherit a family fortune. I even transferred out of a top-tier major to join the one she was in, ruining my own future. I had given up everything for her, only to find out that she was now using all of that as ammunition to mock me. Everything I had done for her seemed worthless in her eyes. Suddenly, Marco appeared by Evelyn's side. Evelyn, it's getting late. Let me walk you back to your dorm, he said, carefully draping a coat over her shoulders. Evelyn's eyes lit up the moment she saw Marco. Sure. Let's go. Before leaving, she turned around and sneered at me. Gabriel, no wonder your parents don't want you. You might as well stay an orphan for the rest of your life. Indeed, the people closest to you always know where to twist the knife. But the thing is, I'm not an orphan. Not only am I not an orphan, but my family also owns several hospitals, and my parents are fairly well known in the medical field. In the previous life, after cutting ties with my family, I had lied to Evelyn about my true background, telling her that I had been abandoned by my parents since childhood, that I was an orphan. She had always appeared so sympathetic, consoling me with kind words. I never knew that beneath her seemingly understanding exterior, she had been secretly rejoicing in my misfortune. This time, with my reincarnation, I had finally seen through the true nature of the person I had once shared my life with. In the previous life, my father had been heartbroken when he found out that I had severed ties with him for Evelyn, and he died from the emotional strain. But I was too stubborn to visit him for his last moments. The guilt I felt now was unbearable. Thankfully, in this life, I hadn't completely cut ties with my family yet. We were only in a cold war. This time, I wasn't going to leave any regrets behind. I immediately dialed my father's number. Father, I'm sorry. I've realized that I can't throw away my future for a woman. I will pursue a career in medicine and inherit the family business. Now, I would show Evelyn that without her, I could still become someone who wasn't just a penniless orphan. I soon reconciled with my family and took on some responsibilities in our business. One day, my father suddenly took me to meet someone. It was my childhood friend, Angelica. Our families had always been close, and when we were young, our parents joked about arranging a marriage between us. After I severed ties with my family, I had lost contact with her. I heard that when my father passed, Angelica had been by his side. I suddenly felt a sense of guilt toward her. When our eyes met, I saw that her eyes were slightly red, and her body trembled, as if she was about to cry. Angelica was always a strong-willed girl. I had never seen her like this before. My father reached out to pat her on the shoulder, but she flinched in fear, covering her ears and crouching down on the ground. Please, don't take me back. I don't want to be with Marco anymore. Hearing Marco's name froze me in place. I quickly searched through my memories from the previous life. After I left the Chief family and got together with Evelyn, I had heard that Angelica and Marco had gotten married. Seeing her in this distressed state, doubts started creeping into my mind. Why would she shout Marco's name now, when she didn't even know him at this point? I pulled her aside, trying to calm her down while questioning her. Angelica, don't be afraid. What happened with Marco? Marco, he's a monster. He beats me every day and locks me up at home. He even tried to strangle me. At that moment, I was 100% sure I wasn't the only one who had been reincarnated. Angelica, don't worry. Now you have a second chance. I tested her a little. Sure enough, she looked up at me with wide eyes. You've been reincarnated too. I nodded and explained everything that had happened. Evelyn is really that kind of person. She deserves to be with a devil like Marco. After hearing my story, Angelica was furious. From her, I learned that while Marco appeared to be a charming and gentlemanly figure on the surface, he was actually a violent psychopath behind closed doors. In the previous life, because I had cut ties with my family, the arranged marriage between the Jean and Chief families had been cancelled. Marco went on to become a small-time celebrity in the entertainment industry. Angelica's father, in order to secure his position in the company, had forced her to marry Marco. Thinking about how all of this misfortune had happened to Angelica because of me, I felt deeply guilty. This time, I wasn't going to let her down. I reached out and took her hand, leading her toward my father. Father, the marriage contract we made when we were children now seems like a good time to fulfill it. Chapter 4. The news of my engagement to Angelica spread quickly. None of my classmates knew the truth about my family situation. They only knew that Angelica was the daughter of the Jean family. They all assumed I had latched onto a rich woman and was living off her wealth. Your ambition is huge. You accused me of betraying you. And now, just days after I dumped you, you've latched onto a rich woman. And you still have the nerve to call me the traitor. I think you were plotting this all along. One day, while at school, I ran into Evelyn and Marco again. Evelyn took the opportunity to mock me, her tone sharp and venomous. It was such a stark contrast to the kind and graceful person she used to be in the past. She must have been feeling some kind of discomfort about the fact that I'd moved on so quickly and found someone like Angelica. Well, I have no money or ability, and I'm tired of trying. This is just how it is. Instead of being bothered by her mocking, I deliberately tightened my grip on Angelica's hand, wanting to flaunt it in front of her. Evelyn, seeing that I wasn't angry and was even showing affection for Angelica, seemed to lose her composure. She tried to badmouth me in front of Angelica. Beauty, what's so good about him? He's poor, and he has no outstanding abilities. I advise you not to waste your time on someone like him. Angelica, true to her straightforward nature, didn't even acknowledge Evelyn. Instead, she shot her a big eye roll. Stop wasting time here. Didn't your father open a hospital near the city center? He asked me to go see it with you. Evelyn's expression turned sour at those words, but then, she let out a self-assured laugh. Ha ha ha. So he lied to you about his family owning hospitals. I knew there had to be something off. He's just an orphan abandoned by his biological parents, who happened to study medicine. Don't let him fool you. I casually took out a business card from my pocket and handed it to Evelyn, who was still laughing. I'm Gabriel, son of Chi Xian. My family owns many private hospitals. Oh, and the one you often visit, that's probably one of ours. This is my childhood friend, Angelica, the daughter of Jean Group, not some random rich woman. At that moment, Evelyn stopped laughing. That evening, Angelica told me that Marco had been reincarnated as well. Today, when we ran into each other, Marco kept staring at me. I knew he must have reincarnated with me. I was so scared. I got goosebumps. After some analysis, we concluded that Marco was likely deliberately approaching Evelyn. If it had been that easy for Evelyn to win over Marco in the past, she wouldn't have ended up with me later. I couldn't wait to see how she would react when she discovered that her longtime crush was actually a devil in disguise. The semester flew by, and when we returned to school for classes, I unexpectedly ran into Evelyn at the medical school. She seemed like she wanted to say something to me, but I ignored her and walked past her without a word. To my surprise, she shamelessly followed me into the classroom and sat next to me. What are you doing here? Go back to your liberal arts college and study psychology. I really couldn't understand what she was trying to do. What psychology? This is my classroom. I successfully transferred to the medical school. Now, I'm one of them. Evelyn looked so smug, as if she were proud of her accomplishment. It turned out that she had indeed changed her major again. Apparently, This was against the usual rules, as students could only modify their transfer intentions once. However, due to Evelyn's exceptional grades, the medical school had made an exception and accepted her. I was in disbelief. Evelyn, with her level of ability, really managed to get into the medical school. And wasn't she trying to transfer to the same major as Marco? But I didn't think too much about it. I grabbed my backpack and moved my seat, clearly rejecting the idea of sitting next to her. After class, Evelyn, like a persistent pest, clung to me. Gabriel, please don't be mad. Look, I worked so hard to get into the major that I couldn't even dream of in my last life. Before, I was wrong. We were together for so long, and in my past life, you were so good to me. You wouldn't want to abandon me in this life, right? She tried to reach for my hand, but without hesitation, I pulled it away. Stay away from me. Turning around, I saw Angelica waiting for me in the crowd. Ignoring Evelyn's pleas, I walked straight toward Angelica. Gabriel. Angelica's expression was serious. Just now, Marco came to me and tried to get back together. Chapter 5. Both Angelica and I agreed that this was all part of Marco's scheme, and we chose not to respond to either of them. Evelyn continued to cling to me every day, but each time, I decisively rejected her. A few days later, she suddenly disappeared, not coming to school for several days. I didn't think much of it. After all, in this life, I no longer needed to be tied to her. That was until today when I was at the family hospital handling some matters. As I passed by the obstetrics and gynecology department, I saw a familiar figure. Evelyn was sitting alone on a bench in the hospital, looking somewhat downcast. She noticed me too and lifted her head to meet my gaze. Tears in her eyes, she reached out her hand as if to embrace me, but I quickly pulled away. Evelyn looked hurt and wronged. I snatched the report from her hand and frowned. You're pregnant already? Is it Marco's? She bit her lip and nodded. I simply shoved the report back into her hand and said calmly, I wish you happiness. My response didn't meet Evelyn's expectations, and it seemed to shatter her composure. Gabriel, I regret it. She stood up and blocked my way. Marco only got together with me to use me. He's a psychopath. A few years ago, your father's surgery failed and killed his sister. He's been holding a grudge ever since, and he thought that the person you loved was me. So he's been trying to take me away to get back at you. Now that he thinks you don't love me anymore, he's been torturing me every day, trying to break me down. Evelyn slowly rolled up her sleeve, revealing a dense cluster of scars that were horrific to look at. No wonder Marco had gone back to beg Angelica for reconciliation. Everything he did was aimed at me. So, what do you want now? Seeing that she was willing to explain some of the truth, I reluctantly stopped. Gabriel, take me with you, please. With your family's power, it'd be easy for you to get someone out of Marco's hands. I'll have the baby and let it take your surname. Okay, I know we've never had children before, and I know that was your greatest regret in your past life. I also know you love kids, don't you? I stupidly thought that Evelyn's attempt at reconciliation was heartfelt, only to realize she wanted me to be her fallback. Evelyn still thought I was some kind of naive fool who would agree to anything. She looked at me eagerly, as if she believed I would certainly say yes. You're insane. I forcefully shoved Evelyn away, watching her fall heavily to the ground. Without a second glance, I turned and walked away, not even bothering to help her up. Gabriel, I've already apologized to you, and you still dare to treat me like this. Aren't you afraid of losing me? She screamed after me, but I didn't look back. Gabriel, I was just momentarily blinded. Don't you have any feelings for me left? It was after graduation that Evelyn came to me for reconciliation for the 83rd time. I'm marrying Angelica now. Are you coming? Since I'm sentimental, I won't ask for a wedding gift from you. I quickly sent her the wedding invitation from Angelica and me. She fell silent and didn't try to contact me again. But then, to my surprise, Evelyn actually showed up at the wedding. Only, she wasn't there to celebrate. Gabriel's father killed Marco's sister in a surgery a few years ago, and there's still no explanation. His son is living such a happy life while the rest of us are suffering. Does that seem fair to you? At the wedding, Evelyn snatched the microphone from the host and claimed she was going to expose the true face of the Chief family. She even brought out all kinds of fabricated evidence, accusing our hospital of accepting bribes. She knew everything about me, except for our family dynamics, so creating fabricated evidence against me was a breeze. The daughter of the Marco family is still restless in her grave, and their family isn't taking responsibility while they continue to thrive. How can this be fair? Evelyn managed to stir up the crowd's emotions. Some people even stood up to lead the charge, urging Angelica to open her eyes and not marry me. The scene immediately descended into chaos, with people telling Angelica to reconsider and not marry me, before the wedding could even finish. The search term, Chief Family Hospital Kills People, skyrocketed to the trending list. Evelyn clearly wanted to destroy me, and take down the entire Chief family with it. Miss Jean, aren't you leaving yet? If you don't escape this wedding soon, the police will come to arrest Gabriel, and they'll arrest both of you. Evelyn seemed pleased with the crowd's reaction, even taunting Angelica with her words. Angelica didn't respond to her. She simply bent down and picked up the microphone that had fallen to the ground. Angelica, am marrying Gabriel, willingly. Not only me, but even if something happens to the Chi family, the entire Jean group will stand by them. Without following the usual wedding procedures, Angelica immediately took out the ring and slipped it onto her finger. The whole venue fell silent. It was as if everyone had been stunned by Angelica's powerful aura. She then smoothly slid the ring onto my finger as well. She even shot Evelyn a victorious glance. Evelyn's face twisted in fury. Others no longer dared to speak, silently returning to their seats. In the end, the incident still had a certain impact on the Chi family. Luckily, Jean group continued to support us, which helped us weather this storm. My father fell gravely ill because of the incident. He had always felt guilty about Marco's sister's death, but the truth was, her death had occurred because she didn't follow medical advice, causing her condition to relapse. Ultimately, she died on the operating table. My father's medical skills were renowned, yet he couldn't save her. The Marco family, however, blamed everything on him. Not long after, news came that Evelyn had married Marco. I couldn't help but sneer. No wonder Evelyn had fought so hard to ruin my wedding. It was all for a name, to get her place. After everything Marco had done to her, she was quick to return to him once he gave her a bit of sweetness. To my surprise, just days after Evelyn and Marco's marriage, something went terribly wrong. Gabriel, please, save me. I can't take Marco anymore. Evelyn was kneeling at my doorstep, crying hysterically, her hair a mess, looking utterly disheveled. Marco, he killed my daughter with his own hands. She was his biological daughter. All she did was say one thing, and he killed her. Her emotions were so wild. It seemed like she was nearing the brink of collapse. Anyone who heard this would feel sympathy, and Angelica hesitated for a moment, wanting to open the door for her, but I stopped her. Don't you remember what happened at the wedding? If Marco calls her back with a snap of his fingers, she'll go right back to him, and we'll be the ones who suffer. Angelica thought for a while, then nodded, pulling her hand back. Gabriel, I'm begging you. What's wrong with me? I was tricked by Marco last time. He told me you and Angelica had already been together, so I ruined your wedding out of spite. I was just too emotional. Please don't ignore me. Faced with her pleading, I responded coldly. Marco didn't lie to you. We've been engaged for a long time. We've been together since childhood. She froze, then collapsed onto the ground in shock. Her eyes went blank for a long time before they began to redden. Eventually, something seemed to snap inside her, and she fainted. Calling the ambulance was the greatest kindness I could offer her. Chapter 6. The next time I heard news of Evelyn, it was being spread around that she had killed her own child. Marco had personally taken Evelyn to court. She was beaten half to death by Marco, her child lost, and in the end, she was betrayed by him, forced to take the blame for his actions. Marco is like this. Angelica sighed deeply. Evelyn has no background or connections, and it looks like she'll definitely lose this case. During the trial, Angelica and I sneaked in to observe as spectators. Evelyn stood in the defendant's seat, her face pale, her eyes filled with helplessness and despair. The judge's voice echoed in the vast courtroom, while Marco's lawyer's words seemed aimed solely at Evelyn. But Evelyn couldn't afford a proper lawyer. After marrying Marco, she was stripped of her right to work, had no money, and was completely at Marco's mercy. In this life, she willingly chose to be a housewife. But now, seeing her in such a miserable state, it was clear that she was reaping what she had sown. The forensic report came out, showing clear signs of strangulation on the child's neck, indicating that the child had been intentionally harmed and killed. Your Honor, I never imagined I'd marry such a cruel woman who would strangulate her own child to death. You don't know how happy I was when I first became a father, but my daughter was only 4 years old. Every time I think about how she was taken from this world so young, it feels like my heart is being torn apart. Marco stood up, his voice full of emotion as he addressed the judge, narrating his grief. No wonder he used to be an actor. His performance is convincing. Angelica gritted her teeth, and I saw her nails dig into her palms in anger. Anyone who had been treated like this by a scumbag in a previous life would feel anger bubbling up when facing that same person now. Watching them try to frame someone else, Marco's lawyer also rose, presenting a case and evidence that seemed solid and well prepared. It was my child. How could I possibly kill her? Evelyn cried out in anguish. Her child had been killed, and now she was forced to take the fall for the murderer. It was beyond what any ordinary person could endure. Evelyn completely broke down in the courtroom, her appearance unrecognizable in her hysterical state. She lifted her tearful eyes and caught sight of me sitting in the audience. She hesitated for a moment. Her gaze was filled with sorrow, as though there was something she couldn't express. My heart was conflicted, but I didn't know what to do, so I averted my eyes, avoiding her gaze. Though Marco held the upper hand in the courtroom, in the end, it was still an unfair fight. After all, a powerful man like Marco trying to pin a crime on a fragile woman was still lacking in concrete evidence. The preliminary trial ended, and the judge couldn't yet determine her guilt, but I suspect Evelyn wouldn't be able to survive the next appeal. Gabriel. As I stood up to leave, I suddenly heard Evelyn call my name from behind. I turned around, and saw the tears sliding down Evelyn's cheeks, her shoulders trembling. I hadn't expected that when we finally met face to face again, I would be thriving in the medical field, while Evelyn had fallen into hell. I'm sorry, I can't help you. I didn't leave any room for negotiation and didn't want to get involved with her in her current state. After all, it was she who had chosen to leave me in the past. I didn't come to you asking for help this time. I just thought that after the next court session, I'd really be going to jail. I wanted to see you once more before that happens. Recently, I keep dreaming about us in the past life. Back then, I really didn't like you, and all my love was an act. But now, I can't help but miss you constantly. In that life, you would support any choice I made, and you would always be there behind me, protecting me. Without Angelica, you would still choose to forgive me, wouldn't you? She suddenly threw the question at me. No, and even if there's a next life, I would still choose Angelica, I replied without hesitation. Evelyn was silenced by my words. She wiped away the tears at the corner of her eye, took a deep breath, and after a long pause, finally spoke. All right, I understand. Chapter 7. I never expected that the situation with Marco and Evelyn would take a turn. It seemed that Evelyn had decided to go all in, exposing all of Marco's actions, risking her reputation to bring him down. Marco couldn't withstand the wave of public pressure and was soon being criticized by netizens. It turned out that Marco had fallen out with the company he had partnered with in his previous life. In the past, Marco's success had been largely due to the backing of the Jean family. This time, with the Jean family no longer supporting him, other companies were unwilling to invest in his abilities. Angelica took things a step further, holding Marco's criminal evidence in her hands. She dragged me along to Marco's company and forced him to clear up the rumors that my father had killed his sister. With the combined strength of both our families, taking down Marco was as easy as crushing an ant. Gabriel, you think you've won just by using words to defeat me? Marco laughed loudly. Everything I've done in this life is just to take your life and avenge my sister. Nothing else matters. As soon as his words fell, the fire alarm rang. Angelica and I immediately realized the gravity of the situation. Marco had clearly made up his mind to take us down with him. In a final act of madness, he had set fire to his own company. I quickly turned to open the door and leave, only to find that the door had been locked from the outside. Don't waste your time. Just wait and apologize to her in hell for your father's sins. Marco's expression twisted in anger. His actions were truly insane. You're the one who's wasting your time, I shouted back. In the next moment, the door was kicked open. Evelyn stood at the door, holding a set of keys. Quick, go this way, she urged. The firemen arrived soon after, waving their hands and guiding us toward the exit. Without hesitation, I grabbed Angelica's hand and rushed out. Marco realized things were going wrong and tried to follow us, but Evelyn suddenly stepped in front of him, throwing all her strength into knocking him down. Look carefully, Marco. The one who's going down with you today is me. She tried to pin him to the ground, but her strength was no match for Marco's. He easily threw her off. However, Evelyn was prepared. She quickly pulled out a sharp knife from behind her and pressed it to Marco's throat, closing in step by step. Choose your death, Marco. You can die by my knife, or you can burn to death in the fire. Your choice. Once I was outside, I directed the firemen back to the scene to help Evelyn. Despite the confrontation with Marco, Evelyn noticed me. In that fleeting moment, I saw a hint of reluctance in her eyes. Evelyn suddenly threw the keys out the window, kicked away the obstacle blocking the door, and with a loud bang, the door slammed shut. Without the keys, the firemen couldn't open the door, and with the fire spreading, they had no choice but to give up. I, on the other hand, had inhaled too much carbon monoxide and lost consciousness. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself back in my 80-year-old body. However, this time, the person sitting beside me was Angelica. Where are Marco and Evelyn? I asked as I sat up. She furrowed her brow, looking puzzled. They've been dead for decades. Don't you remember? She replied. I looked out the window, and as the days passed, I realized that the memories of my past life were starting to fade. After a few days, I could no longer remember Evelyn at all.